Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and we are continuing our discussion on absolute value functions. This time, we are going to be talking about how does the variable h here affect our absolute value function. So notice h is going to be the letter within the absolute value signs with that x. And a big tip here is recognize that we have a minus h. So when we talk about a positive h versus a negative h, we're talking about this variable here. So in that case, a positive h might look like a negative 2, and a negative h might look like a positive 4. Because remember, we're looking at minus negative 4. And if we have a negative and a negative, it turns it into a positive. So that's what we're looking at there. So keep those in mind as we start talking about how does h affect this function. So here are two different functions. We're going to compare them to that parent function. And remember, our parent function here is f of x equals the absolute value of x. So in order to compare these, the easiest thing to do is to graph them. So let's go ahead and take a look at their graph. Now in red here, I already have our parent function, or that f of x equals the absolute value of x. Now I want to add in this first function here. So I'm going to do m of x equals the absolute value of x minus 2. And remember to keep that x minus 2 within our absolute value. Now notice what happened here. When it says x minus 2, we went from a vertex down here of 0, 0 over to a vertex of 2, 0. So what happened here was our function actually shifted. And it shifted to the right 2 spots, right? Let's look at that again. It went from 0, 0 over to 2, 0. So it shifted over 2 spots, but those values are still the same. We're still at 3, 1 and 1, 1. So the spread of it didn't change, but it shifted. It's like it just took itself and moved. Now let's look at this function n of x, and we're going to see what happened there. So n of x is going to be a green function. So n of x equals the absolute value of x plus 4. Oh, this one's black. And what do you notice here? What is our vertex? Our vertex is negative 4, 0. So you're telling me if I have, let's look at this. If I have a minus 2 here, I'm actually going to shift to the right 2. If I have a plus 4 here, we ended up shifting to the left 4. And this seems kind of counterintuitive because of this idea that right here, it looks like we have a minus 2. So why in the world are we going 2 in the positive direction? But remember what we talked about at the beginning of this video, that we're looking at h. And h here, this is the number we're talking about as shifting. So when we have a minus 2, or this absolute value of x minus 2 here, our h value is actually positive. It's a positive 2 because there's this minus sign here. In that other problem we were looking at where it was x plus 4, this could also be written as x minus negative 4, right? Because minus a negative is the same as a positive. And in that case, the value that we're looking at there for h is actually a negative number. So because of that subtraction, x subtract h, that number that we're looking at, we want to just look at the integer, not the sign in front of it. Okay, if it's a plus sign, we want to think in our heads that this is actually a minus a negative, and we want to change that. So when we have this idea here, when our k value, or not our k, we're not talking about k, we're talking about h. When our h value is positive, so when h is positive, what happens is we shift to the right h units. That's how we say that. So we would shift to the right h units. So in the function number 1 here, m of x equals the absolute value of x minus 2, we shift to the right 2 units. Okay, it would be inches, but our graph doesn't have a label. Similar with number 2 here, we see that when h is negative, that we are going to shift to the left h units. So depending on whether or not h is positive or negative, that's how we shift it. But remember, when h is positive, the function looks negative. And when h is negative, the function looks like it's adding. Okay, so it's the reverse of what we think in our minds should be happening, but that's what it is. So as a quick summary, when we are talking about how this value h here, when we're talking about how h affects the graph of the absolute value function, h causes it to shift right if h is positive, or it causes it to shift left if it's negative. And that is how h affects our graph.